The distress beacon had been screaming across the void of space for 3 long days, before anyone on the Galactic Council decided to acknowledge it. And when they finally did, the mood in the Grand Crystalline Chamber was anything but hopeful. Ambassador Threnvix stood at the center of the room, his translucent skin flickering with soft, bioluminescent patterns that betrayed his unease as he addressed the 12 representatives from different starfaring civilizations who had gathered. For this emergency session, we have confirmed the source of the signal, he announced in a voice that carried the weight of centuries of diplomatic training. And it comes from the Korath Hegemony's forward mining station, located deep within the Vilus Drift. A wave of murmurs spread through the assembled delegates like ripples across still water, and none of them sounded particularly sympathetic to the plight of the Korathi. Korath were not a species that inspired compassion or loyalty among the other civilizations of the galaxy, for they had spent the better part of 600 years raiding weaker worlds, capturing innocent beings and selling them into slavery, and stripping entire planets of their natural resources without a single thought for the devastation they left behind. Delegate Sora of the Manathi Collective rose from her seat. Her forearms crossed in a gesture of absolute contempt as she hissed her response through needle-sharp teeth. Let them burn in the fires of their own making, she declared without an ounce of mercy in her voice. For they showed no compassion when they descended upon our outer colonies and harvested our people like cattle. Several other delegates nodded in agreement, their own species having suffered similar atrocities at the hands of Korath raiders over the long centuries of galactic history. But Threnvix raised one slender hand to quiet the growing chorus of voices calling for inaction. And when he spoke again, his tone carried the firm authority of galactic law. I understand your anger, he said carefully, and I share your memories of Korath cruelty. But the law that binds us all together is clear on this matter. He gestured toward the holographic display that floated in the center of the chamber, showing the blinking distress beacon and its coordinates. Any civilization that broadcasts on the universal distress frequency is entitled to receive aid from the galactic community, and we are bound by the sacred accord of 17 stars to answer that call regardless of our personal feelings. The chamber fell into an uncomfortable silence as the delegates considered the weight of their obligations. The Yelthan representative, a massive creature whose bulk filled nearly a quarter of the chamber, shifted uneasily on his support platform before speaking in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. Then who among us will go to their rescue? He asked. For our fleet is engaged in defensive operations along the border, and we cannot spare a single vessel for this mission. One by one, the other delegates offered their own excuses for why they could not possibly respond to the distress call. The Manathi ships were too far away and could never arrive in time to make a difference. The Valkyrie had no vessels capable of entering the dangerous region of space where the Vilus Drift was located. The Thornian Republic claimed their crews were simply unprepared for combat. Operations of this nature, each excuse was more transparent than the last. And Threnvix felt his 3 hearts sink as he realized that no one in this chamber truly wanted to help the Korath, regardless of what the law demanded. Finally, with no other options remaining, Threnvix consulted the stellar navigation maps that hovered before him, searching for any civilization close enough to reach the mining station before it was too late. What he found made a cold sensation crawl through his entire body. There is one species that might be able to respond in time, he announced slowly, the words seeming to stick in his throat. Though they are relatively new to our community, having joined the Galactic Council only 47 standard cycles ago. Who are these beings you speak of? Sora demanded impatiently. Threnvix took a deep breath before answering. They call themselves humans, and they come from a world they have named Earth. The silence that followed was heavier than any that had come before, filled with unspoken fears and half-remembered rumors about the strange new species that had recently emerged onto the galactic stage. The humans were an enigma that no one in the council truly understood, for they came from a planet so incredibly hostile that most species had classified it as a Category 7 death world, the most dangerous classification possible. Their homeworld featured active tectonic plates that constantly shifted and cracked, spawning earthquakes and volcanic eruptions that would have devastated any other civilization. Their weather patterns included hurricanes, tornadoes, blizzards, and floods that struck without warning and killed thousands at a time. Their oceans were filled with predatory creatures capable of swallowing other beings whole, and their landmasses hosted megafauna with claws and teeth designed for killing. Even their sun bombarded the planetary surface with harmful radiation that would have been lethal to most galactic species. And yet somehow, against all odds and logic, the humans had not only survived on this nightmare world, but had actually managed to thrive and build a civilization capable of reaching the stars. They are dangerous and unstable. The elfin representative rumbled with obvious concern, for their history is nothing but an endless succession of wars fought against each other with weapons of increasing destruction. That may be true, Threnvix admitted, but they are also the only option available to us if we wish to honor our obligations. Under galactic law, he straightened his posture and made his decision. I will send the request to their government myself and pray that they choose to answer. Far across the galaxy, in a region of space near the Arcturus relay point, Captain Samuel Grant of the Earth vessel Resolute was conducting a routine patrol when the transmission arrived. Grant was a Rose, broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with short, gray-streaked hair and a scar along his jaw that he never spoke about. And when his communications officer called out to him, he turned from the viewport with the calm efficiency of a career military officer. Sir, we have an incoming priority message from the Galactic Council, Lieutenant Maria Vance reported from her station, her young face showing clear surprise at receiving such a communication. Put it through to my station. Grant ordered. The message was brief and to the point, containing coordinates for a location in the Velas Drift, a summary of the distress signal, and a formal request for immediate assistance from any available Earth vessel. Grant studied the star chart for a long moment, calculating distances and travel times in his head before turning to his first officer. What do we know about these Korath? He asked Commander Daniel Price, a lean man with sharp eyes and a quick mind. Price pulled up the intelligence files on his display and frowned as he read through the information contained within. They are slavers and raiders, he reported, responsible for countless atrocities against weaker species over the past 6 centuries. And they are definitely not the kind of people we would normally risk our lives to help. Grant nodded slowly as he considered the situation from every angle. The Galactic Council had asked humanity to prove itself as a responsible member of the galactic community, and this distress call represented an opportunity to demonstrate what humans were truly made of. Set a course for the Velas Drift, Grant ordered firmly, and bring all hands to battle stations, for we do not know what we will find when we arrive. The engines of the Resolute roared to life with tremendous power, and the ship leaped forward into faster-than-light travel, carrying its crew of 312 humans toward a conflict that would change the galaxy forever. The Resolute dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Velas Drift, and the moment the ship returned to normal space, every alarm on the bridge began screaming warnings at the crew. Ensign Paul Carter sat at the sensor station, with his eyes wide and his hands trembling slightly as he tried to make sense of the readings flooding across his displays. Multiple contacts detected. he shouted over the noise of the alarms. "And I am reading massive debris fields, active energy discharges, and something else out there that I cannot identify, but it is big, sir. Really big, Captain." Grant stepped forward to the main view screen and felt his stomach tighten at the sight that greeted him. The Korath mining station hung in the void like a wounded beast, with entire sections of its hull torn open and venting precious atmosphere into the cold emptiness of space. And scattered around it were the broken remains of what had once been Korath warships, now reduced to nothing more than twisted metal and floating corpses. But what truly captured the attention of everyone on the bridge was the enemy. They came in swarms of thousands upon thousands. Small craft, no larger than a standard shuttle that moved through space in perfect synchronization as if controlled by a single mind. And they were attaching themselves to the station's hull before cutting through with some kind of energy weapon that left glowing scars in the thick metal plating. What in the name of everything holy are those things? Lieutenant Vance whispered from her station, her voice barely audible above the chaos. "Unknown hostiles." Commander Price replied grimly as he checked and rechecked the database for any match. "And there is nothing in our records that even comes close to describing what we are seeing out there." Grant watched in horrified fascination as a group of the enemy craft descended upon a Korath escape pod that was trying to flee the carnage, surrounding it like predators closing in on wounded prey. And within seconds, the pod went completely dark as its systems were overwhelmed. "They are not trying to destroy the station," Grant realized with a growing sense of dread. For if destruction was their goal, they would have simply blown it apart from a distance. He turned to his first officer with grim understanding dawning in his eyes. "They are harvesting the crew," he said, "taking them alive for some purpose we cannot yet comprehend." A transmission suddenly crackled through the bridge speakers, filled with static and interference, but still understandable thanks to the ship's advanced translation systems. The voice belonged to a Korath, and it was filled with absolute terror, unlike anything Grant had ever heard before. "Please," the voice begged, "if anyone is receiving this message, you must help us. For they are taking us alive, and they are changing us into something horrible." The transmission dissolved into a wet gurgling sound that made even the most hardened members of the crew flinch before cutting off. Entirely Ensign Carter spoke up again, his voice shaking badly as he reported his findings. "Sir, I am getting better readings on those smaller craft now, and they are not actually ships at all." He swallowed hard before continuing. "They appear to be living organisms, some kind of biomechanical hybrid between organic tissue and advanced technology. And the larger structure behind all this debris is a vessel approximately 40 kilometers in length." The view screen adjusted its magnification, and the crew of the Resolute saw their true enemy for the first time in all its nightmarish glory. It was a massive, writhing construct of metal and living flesh twisted together in ways that defied natural law, with enormous tendrils extending in every direction like the arms of some cosmic horror reaching out to grasp its prey. The entire structure pulsed with sickly bioluminescent light, and smaller organisms emerged continuously from ports along its surface like parasites leaving their host to seek new victims. "That is a hive ship," Price said quietly, his face pale beneath the bridge lights, "and we are looking at some kind of collective intelligence that operates as a single unified mind." Grant turned to Carter with urgency in his voice. "How many life signs are still registering on that station?" Carter checked his readings twice before answering. "Approximately 4,000 beings are still alive over there, sir. But that number is dropping every minute as more of them are transported to the hive ship. 4,000 living beings were trapped on that station. And even though they were Korath, even though their species had committed terrible crimes against countless innocent victims, Grant knew that no one deserved whatever fate awaited them inside that abomination. Open a communication channel to the hive ship. Grant ordered firmly. Lieutenant Vance looked at him with surprise. Sir, they have not responded to any of our standard hailing frequencies since we arrived. Open it anyway, Grant repeated. For I want them to know exactly who we are. The channel crackled open, and Grant spoke in a clear, steady voice that carried the full weight of human determination. This is Captain Samuel Grant of the Earth vessel Resolute, and I am addressing the unknown force currently attacking this station. He paused for a moment before continuing. You are engaged in hostile action against beings who are protected under galactic law, and I am ordering you to cease your attack immediately or face the consequences of human intervention. For several long seconds, there was nothing but empty static, and some of the crew began to wonder if the enemy was even capable of communication. Then something responded. The voice that came through the speakers was unlike anything human ears had ever heard before. A chorus of thousands of voices speaking in perfect unison, layered and distorted in ways that made the translation systems struggle to process the words. We are the collective, the voices declared without emotion, and we do not cease our activities for any reason, nor do we negotiate with lesser beings. The chorus continued with chilling certainty. We consume all that we encounter and add their biological distinctiveness to our own purpose. And your vessel is small while your species is unknown to us. There was a pause that felt like the universe holding its breath. You will be added to our greater purpose, the collective announced. And you should not resist us, for resistance only causes unnecessary pain during the assimilation process. Grant reached over and killed the communication channel. With a decisive motion, he turned to face his crew. And every man and woman on that bridge saw something in their captain's eyes that they had seen before in the eyes of human warriors throughout all of history. It was not fear. Though fear would have been completely understandable in that moment, it was cold, calculating fury, an absolute determination to fight against the darkness, regardless of the odds. All hands to battle stations, Grant commanded in a voice that rang through the entire ship. And prepare for full combat operations against hostile forces. He looked at the hive ship on the view screen one more time before adding, We are going in, and we are going to show these things what happens when they threaten beings under human protection. The crew of the Resolute moved with practiced efficiency, every person knowing exactly what was expected of them as they prepared for what would become the most desperate fight of their lives. Weapon systems powered up to full capacity. Shields were raised to maximum strength, and throughout the ship, Marines checked their gear and loaded their weapons with grim determination. They were about to enter a battle against an enemy that outnumbered them by thousands to one. An enemy that had already destroyed an entire fleet of Korath warships. An enemy that wanted to consume them and transform them into mindless drones. But they were humans, born and raised on a world that had been trying to kill them since the first of their ancestors crawled out of the primordial oceans millions of years ago. They had faced extinction-level events, ice ages, plagues, and predators that would have wiped out any other species in the galaxy. And they were still here. The Resolute's engines roared with power as the ship accelerated toward the swarm, its weapons tracking targets and its crew ready to fight. The collective had made a terrible mistake when they ignored the warning. They were about to learn why humans called their homeworld a death world, and why those who survived such a place were the most dangerous beings in all of creation. The Galactic Council watched the battle unfold through long-range sensor arrays positioned throughout the region. And with each passing minute, their disbelief grew stronger and stronger until it threatened to overwhelm their ability to process what they were witnessing. The human ship was tiny compared to the massive hive vessel that dominated the battlefield. A mere speck of metal against a mountain of twisted flesh and technology. And by all reasonable calculations, it should have been destroyed within the first few seconds of engagement. Instead, The Resolute was carving a bloody path through the enemy swarm with weapons that operated on principles the Council scientists could barely comprehend. What exactly are they firing at the enemy? Ambassador Threnvix demanded as he leaned forward to study the tactical displays more closely. A technician worked frantically at a nearby console before providing an answer that left the entire observation chamber stunned. They appear to be using kinetic projectiles, the technician reported with obvious confusion in his voice. Solid chunks of metal accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, and the impacts are causing catastrophic damage to the bioorganic components of the enemy craft. Delegate Sora made a sound of disgust from her position at the council table. That method of warfare is barbaric and primitive beyond belief. It may be barbaric, another delegate countered with growing respect in his voice. But you cannot deny that it is proving extremely effective against these creatures. On the view screen, the Resolute wove through the swarm of enemy organisms with agility that seemed impossible for a vessel of its size. Dodging attacks and returning fire with devastating precision, the ship's point defense systems filled the surrounding space with countless tracer rounds that shredded the smaller organisms before they could get close enough to attach themselves to the hull. When a group of the creatures did manage to latch onto one section of the ship, the humans responded in a way that shocked every watching alien. They deliberately vented atmosphere from that section, flash freezing the organisms in an instant, and then sent teams of armored personnel to cut away the frozen remains with handheld tools. They are fighting hand-to-hand inside their own ship. The Yelthan representative observed with something that sounded almost like awe. And unless my translator is malfunctioning, I believe some of them are actually enjoying the experience inside the Resolute. The situation was far more desperate than the distant observers could appreciate. But the crew was performing exactly as their training had prepared them to do. Sergeant Kevin Blake led a fire team of 4 Marines through Corridor 7, where a hull breach had allowed 3 of the enemy organisms to force their way inside the ship. The creatures were even more horrifying up close than they had appeared on the view screen. All grasping limbs and mouths filled with needle-like teeth designed for tearing flesh from bone. Contact on the left side, Blake shouted as the first creature came lunging out of the shadows. His team opened fire with automatic weapons that roared like thunder in the confined space, and the bullets tore through the first creature in a spray of dark ichor that splattered across the corridor walls. The second creature threw itself at Private First Class Nina Cruz with terrifying speed. But she had been raised in the slums of a human city, where survival meant learning to fight before you learn to walk. She sidestepped the attack with practiced grace and drove her combat knife deep into what passed for the creature's head, twisting the blade before pulling it free with a wet sound. "Area is clear," she reported while wiping her knife on her uniform without any visible sign of fear or disgust. "Move to the next section," Blake ordered as he reloaded his weapon, "because we are not going to let a single one of these things survive on our ship." On the bridge, Captain Grant coordinated the assault with cold precision that came from decades of military experience and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. Targeting solution is locked on the hive ship's propulsion cluster, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Brooks reported from the weapons station, his fingers hovering over the firing controls. "Fire," Grant ordered without hesitation. The Resolute's main railgun discharged with tremendous force, sending a tungsten slug screaming through space at 12% the speed of light. And the projectile struck the hive ship's rear section with catastrophic results. The slug punched clean through the massive vessel, entering through one side and exiting through the other in a spray of debris and organic material. The entire hive ship shuddered from the impact, and its movements became erratic and uncoordinated. "We have scored a direct hit," Brooks reported with grim satisfaction. and the enemy vessel is now venting atmosphere, along with large quantities of organic material from the wound. We hurt it badly," Commander Price observed as he watched the enemy ship struggling to maintain its position. "But we have not hurt it enough to end this fight," Grant replied as he studied the tactical situation. "So launch the boarding parties immediately, because we are taking that station back from these creatures." The assault shuttles launched from the Resolute's hangar bay in rapid succession, each one carrying 20 Marines in full combat gear who were ready and eager to take the fight directly to the enemy. They crossed the gap between the ship and the station in minutes, attaching to the damaged hull with magnetic clamps before using cutting torches to burn their way. Inside, Lieutenant Hannah Cole led the first assault team through the breach and into the station's interior. And what they found there would haunt their nightmares for years to come. The inside of the station had become a charnel house of unimaginable horror, with bodies lying everywhere in various states of destruction. Some of the dead were clearly Korath, their distinctive features still recognizable despite the terrible wounds that had killed them. Others were the remains of enemy organisms that had been destroyed during the fighting. The air was thick with the smell of copper and something far fouler that none of the Marines could identify. "I am detecting movement ahead of our position," Corporal Jake Simmons reported as he checked his scanner. "Everyone hold your fire until we have confirmed the target is hostile," Cole ordered. Not wanting to accidentally shoot a survivor in the chaos, a figure stumbled out of the darkness toward their position. And what they saw made several of the hardened Marines take an involuntary step backward. It had been Korath once. That much was clear from the basic shape of its body. But now half of its form had been merged with the same biomechanical material that made up the enemy organisms. It moved in jerking, unnatural motions like a puppet controlled by an inexperienced handler. And its single remaining eye was filled with agony beyond description. "Kill me," it rasped through a throat that was half flesh and half machine. "Please, I beg you to end this suffering." Lieutenant Cole did not hesitate for even a moment, raising her weapon and putting a single round through the creature's skull to end its torment. "Command, this is Assault Team 1 reporting in." She spoke into her communication device. "And I can confirm that the enemy is converting captured personnel into hybrid organisms." She took a breath before continuing. "Any survivors we encounter may already be compromised by this process, and I am requesting authorization for extreme prejudice protocols." Captain Grant's voice came back through the channel immediately. "Authorization is granted, Lieutenant. So secure any beings who have not yet been converted and terminate all hostiles without mercy." The battle for the station continued for 6 brutal hours as human Marines fought their way through every corridor and every compartment, clearing the enemy organisms with the kind of efficiency that only came from thousands of years of evolutionary pressure on a death world. They lost 14 of their own during the fighting. Good men and women whose names would be remembered and honored by their comrades. But they rescued 237 Korath who had not yet been converted, pulling them from the jaws of a fate worse than death. When the station was finally secured, Grant ordered the remaining compromised sections destroyed to prevent any organisms from escaping to spread their infection elsewhere. Resolute's weapons reduced those sections to atom. The hive ship, crippled by the earlier railgun strike, attempted to flee into the depths of space. It did not get very far. "Target is locked," Brooks reported from his station. "All weapons are authorized to fire at will." Grant commanded the Resolute unloaded everything it had against the retreating enemy. Railgun rounds and missiles and energy weapons, all combining to tear the hive ship apart piece by piece. Its death scream echoed across all communication frequencies, a sound of thousands of voices crying out in unified agony. Before finally falling silent forever, the battle was over, and against all odds, the humans had won. News of the battle at the Velas Drift spread across the galaxy like wildfire. reaching the farthest corners of civilized space within hours of the final shot being fired. The sensor data was analyzed by the best scientists the Galactic Council had available. And when their initial findings seemed too incredible to believe, the data was confirmed and analyzed again by a completely different team. Using completely different methods, the results were the same each time. And no one in the council chambers could accept what they were being told: a single human vessel, crewed by just over 300 beings, had engaged and completely destroyed a hive ship that should have required an entire fleet to confront. They had accomplished this impossible feat using weapons that most civilized species considered primitive relics from a barbaric past. They had employed tactics that bordered on suicidal, sending their own people into direct combat against an enemy that could convert them into mindless drones with a single touch. And when the fighting was over, they had won. This changes absolutely everything we thought we knew about the balance of power in this galaxy, Ambassador Threnvik said quietly as he reviewed the data for what felt like the 100th time. The rescued Karath survivors had been transported to a neutral medical facility in a safe system, where doctors from a dozen different species worked to treat their physical and psychological wounds. Those survivors told their story to anyone who would listen, and their accounts of human bravery spread almost as quickly as the official reports. One survivor in particular, a former Karath War Master named Gravik, who had seen more combat than most beings could imagine, gave a public statement that was broadcast across every communication network in the galaxy. "I have conducted raids on more than 100 worlds during my career," Gravik said to the assembled reporters, his voice still rough from the trauma he had endured. "And I have faced warriors from dozens of different species in combat situations." He paused to let his words sink in before continuing. "I have never in all my years of fighting seen anything like the humans who came to rescue us from that nightmare." The old War Master's eyes took on a distant look as he remembered. They do not fight the way civilized beings are supposed to fight, with caution and self-preservation guiding their actions. They fight as if the entire universe itself is their personal enemy, he declared. And they fully intend to win that war no matter what it costs them. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to discuss the implications of what had occurred and to determine how their relationship with humanity should proceed going forward. Delegate Sora was the first to voice the concerns that many of the representatives were feeling. "We asked the humans to respond to a simple distress signal and provide assistance to beings in need." She gestured toward the display showing the aftermath of the battle. "We did not ask them to wage a total war of extermination against an enemy force, destroying every last organism without any attempt at negotiation or peaceful resolution. They did exactly what was necessary to protect innocent lives," Threnvik countered firmly, "because the collective would have consumed everyone on that station and then moved on to attack the next populated world in their path. The humans stopped that threat permanently," he continued. "And we should be grateful rather than fearful of their methods." "Grateful," Sora repeated with disbelief clear in her voice. "When 14 of their own people died in that battle and the survivors barely showed any reaction to those losses." She leaned forward to emphasize her point. "What kind of species accepts casualties like that without their morale breaking completely apart?" The Yelthin representative provided an answer in his deep rumbling voice. "A species that evolved on a death world, where danger and death are constant companions from the moment of birth." He shifted his massive bulk as he continued speaking. "A species where every generation must prove themselves capable of survival against an environment that actively tries to kill them at every turn." The huge alien fixed his gaze on the other delegates. "They are not like us in any fundamental way, for they do not fear the things that we fear, and they do not break under pressures that would shatter any of our peoples." The debate continued for many hours as Representatives argued back and forth about what humanity's victory meant for galactic politics. Some wanted to immediately elevate humans to a position of greater authority within the council structure. Others wanted to impose restrictions on human military development to prevent them from becoming a threat to established powers. In the end, no consensus could be reached, and the only conclusion that everyone could agree upon was unavoidable. Humanity had proven themselves in the most dramatic way possible, demonstrating that they were not mere newcomers to be ignored or dismissed. They were not diplomats who would talk endlessly while avoiding decisive action. They were not peacekeepers who would stand aside while atrocities were committed. They were something far more dangerous and far more valuable in a galaxy that suddenly seemed much more threatening than anyone had realized. They were survivors of the most brutal natural selection process imaginable, shaped by millions of years of evolution on a world that killed the weak and rewarded only the strong. And now they had announced their presence to the universe in a way that could never be forgotten. Captain Grant and his crew returned to Earth space as heroes, greeted by crowds of cheering citizens and endless media coverage that celebrated their bravery. Politicians from every nation on Earth lined up to shake Grant's hand and be photographed with the man who had proven humanity's worth to the galaxy. But Grant had no interest in glory or fame, finding the attention uncomfortable and the praise hollow compared to the weight of what he had experienced. He stood alone in the memorial chamber aboard the Resolute, a small room where the names of the 14 crew members who had died in the battle had been engraved on a plaque of polished steel. Commander Price found him there, staring at those names as if trying to memorize every letter. The Galactic Council has voted to award you their highest commendation for valor, Price informed his captain quietly. I do not want their commendation, Grant replied without looking away from the plaque. Because medals and ceremonies cannot bring back the people we lost. He finally turned to face his first officer. What I want is information about what those things were, where they came from, and whether there are more of them waiting somewhere out there in the darkness. Price hesitated before answering. Our intelligence teams have been analyzing the wreckage from the hive ship, and they have made some discoveries that I think you need to hear. Tell me, Grant demanded. There are indications that the vessel we destroyed was merely a scout, Price said carefully. A single ship sent ahead of a much larger fleet to assess potential targets. The implications of those words hung in the air between them like a physical weight. 14 good people had given their lives fighting what amounted to a scouting party. If the main collective fleet arrived in galactic space, the devastation would be beyond anything anyone had ever witnessed. Grant looked back at the plaque one more time before squaring his shoulders with renewed determination. Then, we need to prepare ourselves, he said in a voice that carried the weight of absolute conviction. Because when the collective returns, and they will return, they will know exactly what we are capable of doing. He met Price's eyes with a gaze that burned with fierce resolve. And next time, we need to be ready to show them even more. 3 months after the battle at the Velas Drift, the collective returned to galactic space with a force that made their previous incursion look like a minor skirmish. They came in overwhelming numbers that defied comprehension. 17 massive hive ships, accompanied by swarms of smaller organisms so vast that they literally blotted out the light of distant stars. The armada emerged from the depths of unexplored space on a direct course toward the Galactic Council's capital world, broadcasting a single message on repeat across every communication frequency. We are the collective, and we have tasted your defenders. The chorus of thousands of unified voices declared, and we have learned their weaknesses and adapted our methods to counter them. The message continued with chilling certainty. You will surrender your world, and your population will be absorbed into our greater purpose swiftly and efficiently. But if you choose to resist us, then you will experience suffering beyond anything your limited minds can comprehend. The Council scrambled desperately to mount some kind of defense against the approaching nightmare ships. From every member species were recalled from their normal duties and gathered at the capital world, forming an armada of over 2,000 vessels that represented the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Surely, the Council reasoned, such overwhelming numbers would be sufficient to stop the collective advance. They were tragically wrong. The first engagement between the Council fleet and the collective lasted only 3 hours before the outcome became horrifyingly clear. The Allied vessels fought bravely and managed to inflict significant damage on several of the hive ships. But for every enemy they crippled, 10 of their own vessels were destroyed or captured, and their crews converted into mindless drones. The collective had learned from their defeat at the Velas Drift and had adapted their tactics and technology to counter everything the galactic species could throw at them. By the end of the first day of fighting, the Council fleet had been reduced by more than half, and panic spread through the capital world like a plague. Civilians crowded into evacuation transports in desperate attempts to flee before the collective arrived, while politicians argued endlessly over potential surrender terms that might spare at least some of the population from conversion. All hope seemed lost as the massive fleet of hive ships drew ever closer to their target. And then, like a miracle from the void itself, the humans arrived. They did not come with a single ship this time, for humanity had spent the past 3 months preparing for exactly this moment. 47 human vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect military formation, their hulls painted in drab gray colors and bristling with weapons that ranged from massive railguns to experimental technologies that had never been tested in actual combat. The largest vessel among them was a dreadnought christened the Constellation, commanded by Admiral Robert Hayes, a man who had spent 40 years of his life preparing for a war that most people thought would never come. His voice boomed across the fleet-wide communication channel with absolute authority. All human vessels. This is Admiral Hayes speaking. We did not travel 50 light-years across the galaxy to negotiate with these creatures, he declared, because we came here to win this fight and nothing else matters. All batteries are authorized to engage at will, he commanded. So show these things what humanity is truly capable of doing. The human fleet crashed into the collective formation like a hammer striking an anvil, and the galaxy watched in stunned amazement as the battle transformed from a desperate retreat into something else entirely. The tactics employed by the human commanders were unlike anything the Council species had ever witnessed in all their centuries of recorded warfare. Human pilots used their smaller vessels as bait, drawing enormous swarms of organisms away from the hive ships before detonating nuclear charges that vaporized entire clusters of enemies in blinding flashes of light. When human ships were crippled beyond repair, their crews deliberately rammed them into enemy formations, turning their own vessels into weapons that caused catastrophic damage on impact. Boarding parties launched from human carriers, not to rescue survivors from captured vessels, but to plant explosives deep inside the hive ships themselves. On the bridge of the Constellation, Admiral Hayes coordinated the battle with the grim determination of a man who understood that failure meant the end of everything he had sworn to protect. Hive Ship 7 is breaking away from its formation, Captain Ellen Marsh reported from the tactical station, and it appears to be attempting to flank our left wing. Dispatch the Vigilance and the Harbinger to intercept that vessel immediately, Hayes ordered without hesitation, and tell Captain Donovan that he has full authorization to deploy the new ordnance. Marsh looked up with surprise in her eyes. You mean the Singularity warheads that have never been tested in combat conditions? That is exactly what I mean, Hayes confirmed minutes later. A weapon of terrifying power was unleashed upon Hive Ship 7, creating a miniature black hole that lasted for only a fraction of a second, but caused devastation beyond imagination. The Massive enemy vessel was compressed into a single point of light that winked out of existence as if it had never been there at all. Target has been completely eliminated, Marsh reported with awe in her voice. Good, Hayes replied without any trace of satisfaction. Now move on to the next one, because we have 16 more to destroy. On the surface of the capital world, Ambassador Threnvix watched the battle through. Orbital telescope feeds with an expression of growing amazement that he could not hide. How are they accomplishing this impossible feat? Delegate Sora demanded as she watched yet another hive ship succumb to human weapons. When we had twice as many vessels as they do, and we were losing badly. Threnvix considered the question carefully before providing an answer that he knew would disturb his colleague. The difference is in their fundamental approach to warfare, he explained slowly. Because our people were trying to survive this battle and escape with as many lives as possible. He gestured toward the display showing human ships charging directly into enemy formations with apparent disregard for their own safety. The humans are not trying to survive, he said with quiet wonder, because they are trying to win at any cost, and that is a completely different thing. The battle raged for 2 full days as humanity threw everything they had against the collective invasion. By the time it was over, all 17 hive ships had been destroyed, along with every organism that had accompanied them. The human fleet had paid a terrible price for their victory, losing 19 vessels and over 4,000 crew members who would never return home to their families. But they had won. Admiral Hayes broadcast a final message to the retreating remnants of the collective swarms that were fleeing into the darkness of deep space. Tell your masters exactly what happened here today. His voice rang out across every frequency. And tell them that this galaxy is now under human protection. His tone grew harder as he continued. If you ever return to threaten these worlds again, we will find you wherever you hide. We will hunt you across every light year of space. And we will end your existence completely. The surviving organisms fled into the void without any response, and the galaxy fell silent in the aftermath of the battle. The Galactic Council held an elaborate ceremony to honor humanity's contribution. To their survival medals were awarded to human commanders and crews. Speeches were given by grateful politicians, and promises of eternal friendship and cooperation were exchanged between species that had barely spoken to each other before. But behind closed doors, away from the celebrations and the cameras, the council members spoke to each other in hushed and worried tones. They saved us from annihilation, the elfin representative admitted reluctantly. But what exactly have we invited into our family by showing them how much we need their protection? Deathworlders, Sora whispered with fear evident in her voice, and we thought they would become our allies and partners in building a better galaxy together. She shook her head slowly. Instead, I fear they might eventually become our masters, whether they intend to or not. Threnvix listened to the fears of his colleagues, but chose to remain silent, because he had seen the human vessels in action and had witnessed their crews sacrifice themselves without hesitation. He had heard Admiral Hayes speak of protection rather than conquest, and he had observed human medics treating wounded council soldiers with the same care they showed their own people. But he also understood that the galaxy had fundamentally changed in ways that could never be reversed. The old balance of power that had maintained stability for centuries was completely gone. Collective had been defeated and would probably never threaten civilized space again. But the cost of that victory was a new reality in which one species now stood above all others. In terms of military capability, humanity had answered a simple distress call from beings they had no reason to help. They had expected to find allies in need of assistance and had discovered instead that the universe itself needed defenders against horrors that lurked in the darkness between stars. Now, for better or worse, the fate of the galaxy rested in the hands of the Deathworlders, and The Deathworlders had proven that they would accept no diplomacy with those who threatened the innocent. They would offer no negotiations with